On a November day in 1961, the surface of the Bahamas broke into 1,000 shards of light. The Greek freighter Theo was pushing through a tropical wall as clear as glass when first mate Nikolaos Spachidakis spotted a tiny speck, a cork life float. And on it, a blonde girl lying still, lips cracked from thirst, skin blistered by the sun, yet her chest rose and fell with the faintest breath. The ship swung hard, sailors ran the rail, ropes arced through the air. A man leaned down, arms cutting through salt and glare to haul the child up as gently as lifting a soaked bird. That photograph, one small child adrift on an endless ocean, would be on front pages the next day. But the real story was only beginning. What had drowned an entire family and left a child to drift 4 days and nights? The answer lay in the dark of a yacht with the tender name Bluebelle, and it would make people weep in silence. In the next few minutes, you'll hear a true account of a massacre at sea, an unthinkable survival, and the fierce strength of an 11-year-old girl. You will see sunlight turn the ocean into a desert, hear a heartbeat blend with the rhythm of waves, and touch the heavy question at the center. Why would one man murder a family? And why did the sea return a single child? Bluebelle's voyage began as ordinary as a postcard. Ophthalmologist Arthur Dupral, out of Wisconsin, brought his wife Jean and their 3 children, Brian, Terry Jo, and Renee, to the Bahamas. In the first picture by the pier, everyone is smiling. The water is clear enough to seem like a window laid over white sand. They snorkeled off Great Abaco, gathered shells, talked about coming back for Christmas. Captain Julian Harvey, tall, crisp voice, ex-military, stood at the helm, and his new wife, Mary Dean, sat at the bow, hair neatly tied. Everything looked right. Some stories always begin like that, with things no one could doubt. Night turned the sea to ink and scattered a road of silver across it. Bluebelle hummed. The mast light swung like the eye of a great whale. Terry Jo fell asleep early in a tiny aft cabin, the little space she loved, because a round porthole looked straight out onto the black water. Above her, her parents and brother chatted with the captain, their laughter sometimes falling through the planks like a soft rhythm. That night, she dreamed of dolphins, their bright backs skimming the surface until a scream snapped every bone upright. "Help, Dad!" The cabin door flew. Terry Jo sat up hard, heart kicking. On deck, a lantern lashed wild yellow arcs. Footfalls, something heavy hit wood. Then a strange, sudden quiet, like the eye of a storm. She stepped out, bare feet on cold boards. There was a dark smear on the floor, wet, sticky, and a body lying still by the steps. She couldn't make sense of it. A large figure stood in the light, features unclear. A heavy hand of iron shoved her back into the cabin. The door closed, and the water began to rise. From that instant, Bluebelle ceased to be a boat. It became an hourglass, counting down a death. Icy water slipped through seams. Terry Jo braced her back to the wall, small hands gripping the bunk edge. She heard a man's voice bark, then a rasping of metal, as if someone were opening a vein in the hull. She yanked a line, groped to a tiny life float, more toy than raft, dragged it from its hanging. When she shoved it into the water, Bluebelle shuddered like a harpooned fish. Something huge fell. The dark opened its mouth. She was flung outward, clutching the cork float, bobbing while the sea swallowed every sound. The first night was a cold cave. Wind sang through her ears like over-tight strings. Salt climbed her fingers joint by joint. Around her, the ocean was so wide it stretched everything in her head thin, like cloth pinned in the sun. She shut her eyes. Each time she opened them, the sky had shifted a millimeter. That star moved past her imaginary mast. A soft knocking somewhere, or only her own heart. No way to tell. She whispered, "Mom." The wind gave back a long like someone's breath. Then the sun. Heat poured like boiling water. Only skin could testify to the temperature. Brine gnawed at her, each sting a dry burn. She licked her lips. The salt stabbed her throat. When despair climbed, she dipped her feet for coolness, then jerked them back at a lancing terror. A shadow flick, the heart in her throat. At noon, a fin flashed. The world shrank to a point. She held her breath. Not a shark. Dolphins, 2, then 3, then a school. They circled the float like a thick ring, sometimes nudging a little wave toward her, sometimes gliding so close she could touch a warm, wet back. Those animals with built-in smiles stayed for hours. Toward dusk, they slid away. She dozed and found herself walking through a house glittering with water. The second night, visions came. On glassy water, she saw her father, her brother, her mother, standing on a wooden pier, waving. She raised her hand, fingers shaking from dehydration, and knew the only real thing was the cold. At times, she was sure a ship was nearing, lights, a rope. She opened her mouth to call, but her throat, a dried shell, would not give a sound. The ship vanished. Stars traded places overhead. Beneath, hope traded places with another thing, emptiness. By dawn of the third day, time was gone. The sun sat directly above, heavy enough to erase her small shadow. She thought of useless things. A pink skirt, the round porthole in her cabin, the yarn-haired doll she forgot to pack. She remembered a hymn from a winter church, simple words she mouthed as prayer, clinging to the cliff edge. And when the light thinned, a dark smear grew at the world's rim. She didn't trust her eyes until a hoarse horn pulled a long, low note across thick, salted air. The Theo was really coming. When the freighter's rail filled the sky, everything sped up. A sailor leaned down, a rope fell, rough hands gripped her shoulders. The small body lifted off the water, hair streaming brine onto the deck. Someone spread a blanket. Someone laid a palm on her forehead. Alive. A man began to cry like a child. Among men used to storms, sometimes a fragile breath breaks everything. News hit shore like lightning. The next morning, another man, Julian Harvey, was found dead in a Florida motel bathroom. A day earlier, he had drifted into another port, with a tale of sudden fire, of storm, of finding a little girl's body and trying to save her. He spoke with practiced force, an actor sure of his lines. But when the radio said the Theo had rescued a girl alive, his face went white. The scaffolding collapsed, as if a boat's nails had been yanked out. When the blade dropped to tile, only the radio was still speaking. There were no more excuses. At the Miami hospital, Terry Jo's temperature hit 105 degrees, 40.5 degrees. Doctors said a few hours more and she would have been gone. They ran fluids, salves, bandages. Sometimes she opened her eyes to a white ceiling and a slow fan shadow. Sometimes she slipped back into that thin layer of water. Questions came on tiptoe through a minefield. Your name, your home, what do you remember? Each word was a small cut into a large wound. But truth assembled itself, steady as a plotted course. Files began to knit together. Not an accident, a slaughter, not a spasm, a plan. Odd insurance policies, suspicious sinkings in the past, marriages ending in death. The man who stood sure-footed on deck in rough seas had never balanced his own conscience. The investigation walked to the verdict everyone sensed. A killer had miscalculated a single thing, the survival strength of a child. And Terry Jo. She moved back toward the most basic acts, to drink without fear, to stand without spinning, to look at the sun without feeling it as a giant lamp poised to burn her. She passed through the white rooms of the hospital as if down a long corridor toward the world. Underneath, a thin skin of water still clung. At night, she sometimes heard waves with windows shut. In crowds, she might catch the shape of a tall, crisp-voiced man on a deck, then realize it was only a passerby with a long hat shadow. Years later, grown and married, Terry Jo, now Tara Fassbender, told her story. Not as a courtroom calling for punishment, nor as a broadcast begging tears, simply as someone who had crossed a dark reach and now stood ashore to say, "I was saved for a reason." The book came out. Old photos were reprinted. A memorial plaque to the Dupral family was placed in Wisconsin. Under a line of trees, words about God's arms and eternal life were carved. Between the letters, there was room for a child who did not give up through the worst 4 days of her life. Reporters visited. They brought recorders and careful questions. She sat at a wooden table by a window with a cup of hot tea, hands cupped around it. Outside, a small lake shone like glass. A few ducks traced commas across it. Thin autumn light rested on the sill. "I'm not afraid of water," she smiled. "I survived by going with it." At the end of the sentence, another truth. The sea no longer held her hostage. It had given her back. In the 1980s, when she first began to speak, a group of former teachers came to a book event. They stood at the back, silent for a long while, then apologized for having once been told to act as if nothing had happened, because adults often think silence is a blanket. She shook her head. No one deserves more blame than a man who cut his own throat to escape truth. The rest are shards the living paste to their walls of memory, wherever those walls stand. If there is a miracle here, it's the miracle of endurance. A tiny float on an endless ocean, a small body under a giant sun, a voice like a thread in the roar of waves, and none of it swallowed. Some retell that dolphins escorted the raft for hours. Others say coincidence. Maybe it doesn't matter. The sea did not drown the child. That is enough. In another black and white picture, the girl lies in a hospital bed, eyes wide at the camera, as if gazing into a deep mirror. Light gathers at the corners, not tears, just light. It came through a window where the sun pushed through a thin curtain. Look closely, and you see the shadow of a tree trembling in wind. Everything outside the frame is quiet. The photographer, from far away, pressed the shutter, not knowing what he'd kept. Later, he called that image a small light on an endless ocean. In any edit bay, this story has its beats. The raft sighting, the scream, "Help Dad," Bluebelle sinking, 4 days adrift, Julian Harvey's death, the Miami hospital bed, a woman's voice decades later. But what keeps us is not only these posts. It's the feeling of listening to a survivor place words one by one like stones on a path home. It's how a story moves from impossible to happened, then from happened to why I am still here. If we must close, let it be with this. Dawn at a quiet dock. Water flat as a sheet of white paper. A small boat glides out of frame, unhurried, unafraid. The oar's dip sounds like a whisper. Far off, the horizon opens, thin and bright. Some believe a few of the sea's secrets exist, not to be solved, but to remind us of the limits of our knowing. Perhaps. Yet stories like Terry Jo's exist to show something else. Within limits, there are small hearts wide enough to hold an ocean. So when you dim the lights, when the end cue falls to almost nothing, and the screen makes space for the final cards, leave a moment of silence. Let the wave draw back. Let one breath in and out. Then go on, carrying a small light the sea could not put out. The light of a child who crossed the darkest water and returned to tell us, do not give up. Somewhere, a ship is coming. Somewhere, a hand is reaching down. Somewhere, in the endless blue, hope still rises and falls like a thin breath.